Welcome to the Presentation Skills Workshop. During this video, I will discuss the importance of presentation skills, the planning and preparation of the content. I'll show you a checklist for content and delivery. We'll also discuss things that could go wrong and how to avoid them. And I'll be talking about how you can improve your delivery and use visual aids. There are many life situations, including your college courses, where these skills will be important to you. Aside from in your college courses, in your professional careers, you will want to present ideas to colleagues or in more formal situations, and as well in job interviews where you're presenting yourself. In order to plan the content, it's important for you to think about for a moment what makes a good presentation. When you've watched presentations or attended presentations in the past, what are the elements that make it good? For example, a lot of people believe that when the presenter is confident, knows the material well, uses interesting visual aids, these are all elements that help us to enjoy the presentation. When preparing a presentation for your college class, do you think it's similar to or different from preparing an essay? If you think it's similar to, you're right. In your college presentations, professors are expecting you to introduce your topic, have a body for your presentation, and have a conclusion. When you think about creating and delivering a presentation, here are some of the points that you should be thinking about. This is a resource that's also available within the workshop content for you to print out if you like. Otherwise, you can pause the video and look through this list of statements about creating and delivering a presentation, and you decide if these elements are easy for you or difficult. One of the purposes of this list is to show you the variety of things to consider when you're preparing and delivering a presentation. A second resource that's available inside the workshop for you to print or just look at here is the typical marking scheme or rubric that a professor will use. Notice there are four main areas that the professors are looking at: the presentation organization, the presentation techniques, the research and knowledge, and the timing. Now in the presentation organization, you can see that there's the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. Notice that in the timing, the weight of the grading for timing is only 5% of the mark. However, this is an easy mark if you're careful with your timing. So one thing to do to control your timing is to practice so that you understand how long it takes, and to ask your audience to hold their questions to the end when you can save time for them. If your audience is allowed to ask questions at any time, you may not know what types of questions and how long it might take for you to answer the questions. Especially for a topic that you're less familiar with, it's better for you to ask your audience to save their questions until the end. Here are some questions for you to consider for later. How do you stay organized and on task? What if you get lost? What do you do if your technology fails? What if someone asks you a question that you're not prepared for? And how do you reduce your anxiety? We'll discuss the answers to these questions shortly. When you're planning the content for your presentation, it's very important for you to know your purpose. Often the purpose is outlined in the assignment guidelines and rubric, but it's important for you to consider what information is essential for you to provide to your audience, and what style of presentation is required. Is this an individual presentation, a group presentation? What's the size of your audience? These are some of the considerations for how you plan your content. It's also important for you to understand your audience. Who are you presenting to? Often if you're presenting in class, it'll be to your classmates and professor. What will be important or interesting to them? Well, likely, if the information is interesting or important to you, then it will also be important to them. What do they need to know about the topic? And what questions will they likely have? If you can predict the kinds of questions they'll ask, you can incorporate the information into your presentation so that they'll have their answers before they have to ask the questions. You also need to know your topic. Make sure that you allow plenty of time for research. Start the project early. Focus on aspects that will be important or interesting to your audience. Make sure your focus is consistent with your assignment requirements. Use your assignment rubric to guide the development of your presentation. Many students, when considering the assignment rubric, will only look at the best possible score. But it's also important to look at the lowest score on the rubric in order to avoid these points. These are all insights into what your professor's expecting of your presentation. Preparing the content. As you begin to prepare the content, it's important to consider the language that you'll use. There's a concept called signposting. Signposting is a term that refers to using language inside your presentation to guide your audience. It helps them to understand where they are in the presentation, how much further there is to go. If you're shifting to a new topic or shifting to another example, if you're coming to the end, you can use language to explain that. The audience will feel much more at ease when they understand what's happening and how much further they have to go. In group presentations, it's also important to consider how to make the presentation seem uniform and collaborative. The reality of group presentations in college is that it's very difficult for group members to meet because of different priorities and responsibilities. However, if you had 3 members in your group and each of you had an assigned portion of the presentation to deliver, that means that each of you will still need to do an introduction, a body, and a conclusion for your portion, but you should still have an overarching introduction for the whole presentation and a conclusion. And between each person, make sure to include one sentence that transitions between what you've just said and what your partner is about to say. It goes a long way in creating a unified presentation. This is a checklist referring to the content. When you've completed your presentation, use this checklist as a way of ensuring that all the important elements exist in your introduction, your body, and your conclusion. This resource is also available inside the resources of this workshop as a printable document. This is a second checklist for the delivery of your presentation. Some of the common things you need to consider are, for example, with the organization. So take a look at the organization section. It mentions using cue cards rather than sheets of paper. Often professors prefer that you don't use sheets of paper only because it's tempting for students to read directly from the paper. If you do use cue cards, make sure that they contain just the important words, key phrases, key words, or perhaps even some definitions, just to keep you organized. And practice setting up and using your equipment before the presentation. If you look at the nonverbal behavior section, it mentions making eye contact with your audience, avoiding distracting body movements, something that is distracting to your audience that you may not even be aware of, such as clicking a pen. Let's go back and consider the questions I asked you to think about earlier. So how do you stay organized and on task? And what if you get lost? A few moments ago I was talking about using cue cards. Cue cards are fine, but imagine if you were to drop them and they scattered all over the floor. It's very difficult to look professional and confident and comfortable as you're picking up scattered cue cards and trying to reorganize them. So instead, if you predict that that's a possibility, then perhaps tie them together or staple them so that if you drop them, you simply pick up the whole pack and continue. One technique I use to stay on track or get it back on track if I get sidetracked is to use the PowerPoint slides themselves. So as I'm discussing something, if I'm not sure what the next point is, I might sort of look up at the PowerPoint slide with the audience. From the audience perspective, they believe that you're just giving them an opportunity to look at the slide, when in fact you're checking it to find out where you are. What do you do if your technology fails? So can you imagine if your laptop or the presenter stopped working or didn't work to begin with? Now, some people might think that you could use a whiteboard or a blackboard to write out important terms or draw charts or things like that. The problem with that is any extra time that you spend doing that is time taken away from your plan. Another solution might be to print out your PowerPoint slides in groups of 3 or 6. You don't need to necessarily have a copy for everybody because remember, this is a plan B. This is not expected, so you don't need to prepare printouts for everybody. However, people could share documents and that way everybody can see your slides and no information is lost. What if someone asks you a question that you're not prepared for? This type of issue can cause quite a lot of anxiety for people when they give presentations. So let's think about the two types of questions. One type of question would be something that you should have prepared for, but for whatever reason, you didn't. If somebody asks you that type of question, then simply validate the question and propose a solution. So for example, you might say, that's a great question. While I was preparing my presentation, I didn't come across that information, but I'll check for you and I'll provide it to you next week or by email. The other type of question is one where you're asked a question, but it's not precisely, it may be related to what you were discussing, but it's not really part of your topic. So in that case, you can also validate the question, but you don't need to take responsibility for finding the answer. In that case, you might say, that's a great question, but while I was preparing my presentation, I didn't come across that type of information. Perhaps that could be for another time. How do you reduce your anxiety? A lot of people feel anxious about delivering presentations, and that can be a real problem. I think a little bit of anxiety actually can help you stay on your toes and keep you motivated to do a good job. But too much anxiety can be prohibitive. One of the worst moments in a presentation is right at the beginning. For example, in a classroom, everybody's talking, you go up to the front and the professor calls everybody's attention and says that you're about to present, and everybody stops talking and looks at you. That moment can be quite hard to work through. Keep it simple. Provide a greeting, your name, and what you're going to be talking about. Good morning, everybody. My name is Eric, and today I'll be talking to you about presentation skills. Those 3 semi-automated phrases will help you get through that first barrier to starting your presentation. For most people, once the presentation starts and that awkward silence is cut through, that's probably the worst moment, and things get better from that point. In terms of improving your delivery, there's a few things that you can consider. Be sure to make eye contact. Making eye contact can be a challenge for some people, but pay attention to your audience, and if you see any people who are nodding gently in agreement, be sure to make eye contact with them. They are your allies. It won't be necessary to make eye contact with every single person in the room. Also, remember to smile. When you're nervous, it's very difficult to smile, so you might want to practice that to make your smile genuine, when it's appropriate, of course. Be sure to speak clearly and at what we would call a relaxed pace. It's very tempting when people are nervous for them to speak quickly. That's their brains telling them that they need to hurry up and get it done. But be careful about that, because if you speak quickly, you'll reveal how nervous you are. If you forget to smile or you don't make eye contact, those are also indicators that you're not confident. Whether you are confident or not, you can make eye contact, you can smile, and you can speak at a relaxed pace. And if you do those three things, you will appear confident to your audience, and you'll actually feel confident. Be sure to be punctual and mindful of timing. Remember, I pointed out earlier that timing in your presentation is an easy thing to coordinate. Know your topic. Practice. Make sure that you have plenty of practice so that you know what to say and when to say it. And prepare for problems. Remember, whatever could go wrong, chances are at some point it will go wrong. So if you can predict those problems and have a plan B, then they're not really problems. And your audience will always be impressed with how well you handle these problems. And learn from your experiences. In college, your professors are expecting you to improve these skills. It's not necessary for you to be an expert from the very beginning. This is your opportunity for you to improve your skills and learn from your mistakes, if there are any, or your experiences, the good and bad ones. Here's a list of helpful points regarding visual aids in your presentations. This document is also available in the workshop content for you to print out if you'd like. In the first section, visual aids for presentations include, look at the fourth point, realia. Realia is a term that's used for real objects in your presentations. But I want you to think about this for a moment. Imagine you're doing a presentation on health and nutrition, and you have a bowl of fruit as your realia. You walk up to the podium or the table, put down the bowl of fruit, and deliver your presentation. And during your presentation, you never look at the fruit, you don't talk about it, you don't refer to it. It's just there. And at the end of your presentation, you thank everybody, you pick up your fruit, and you walk away. Now, what does that bowl of fruit do for your audience? Well, it's a point of curiosity for one thing. Some people will make the connection between fruit and health, and others will not, and they'll be curious about why you have the fruit. Are we going to eat the fruit? Is he going to give us the fruit? What's the point of the fruit? Some people won't understand, many will. The idea of realia is really to put people in the frame of mind of your topic. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that you can use some of these tips and strategies to improve your own presentations. Thank you.